In this lesson, I'm going to teach you a new way of factoring called splitting the term. It could be a little confusing at first, but we're going to write out all the steps. Let's review some of the factoring that we have done so far first. Well, we started with something that we call the difference of squares, and that is when I have a squared and another square, I know that if I factor them out, I'm going to have one that's positive and one that's negative with the root of each square. And so if you have something like 4 minus b squared, then my factors are going to be 2 minus b and 2 plus b. Now we can also do the opposite. So instead of multiplying using FOIL or a table, whenever we see 3 minus y and 3 plus y, we can just simply get the squares and get that answer that way. So those are the difference of squares. We also learned about when the square happens outside the parentheses. So when you have a binomial, a plus b, and then you square it on the outside, or it could also be a minus b and you square it. Basically, we're going to have a squared plus 2 times ab, or minus 2 times ab plus b squared. So you can use the FOIL or a table, but essentially that's going to be answer. So those are shortcuts when you are multiplying binomials that you can use to do the reverse as well. So here you have an example of what it would look like with numbers and variables. And what's important here is that you can always go backwards. So this is a technique for multiplying, but you can also go backwards. The third type of factoring that we learned is something called the product sum method. And that basically says that you have to look at the last term and look for factors that are from that last term and find a combination that will add up to the term in the middle. So for example, in here you have an example with numbers. My last term is 2, so my factors of 2 would be 1 and 2. If I multiply them together, I get 2. If I add them together, I get 3. And that's how I can factor out this trinomial. That is the product sum theorem, where the product of the factors are going to multiply to 2, and they're going to add up to 3. And of course, before you do any of this, it's always important to see if they have a greatest common factor that you can factor out first before you do any of these methods. So I think the product sum method works great when the coefficient in the first term is a 1. It works really well. There's actually no places where it won't work if the coefficient is a 1. But what if we had a trinomial like this? What if we had 2x squared plus 13x plus 15? Then the product sum method doesn't work so well for this. You could guess and check, but that would take you a really long time, and so I don't usually recommend guess and check. I don't use it. So when we think about how to do this quickly when you have a coefficient in your first term, then we are going to go to something called splitting the term, also known as splitting the middle. And basically, splitting means breaking apart. So when we look at this trinomial, the term in the middle, the 13x, we're going to split it into 2 separate terms. Let me show you how we do this. Step by step, the first thing we're going to do is you always want to factor out any greatest common factor that you have. In this case, there's no common factors between 2, 13, and 15. So we're going to keep moving. I'm going to now label each individual monomial in this trinomial as A, B, or C. And that mainly means the coefficient, the number. So A is going to be 2, B is going to be 13, and C is going to be 15. So that you understand what I mean when I say step 2, get the product of A, C. So I want you to multiply the number that stands for A and the number that stands for C. In this case, 2 and 15, which make 30. After you get the product of your outside terms, you're going to try and use the product sum method. So you're going to list all the factors of that 30. And now here I am listing all the factors of 30, and I need to find one that's going to add up to 13. And I found it, 10 and 3. Now, here's where the whole breaking apart the middle, splitting the term, comes into play. We're actually going to rewrite this whole thing, but instead of having a trinomial, we're now going to end up with a polynomial of 4 different terms. So step 4, we're going to rewrite this in expanded form. The first and your last term never change. Don't touch them, just keep them the way they are. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this middle term. No matter what number goes where, we're always going to take this variable x. So each of these terms are going to have an x. Now we're going to put our factors down. The combination that works for our product sum method is 3 and 10, and they're both positive. So I'm going to write the 3, and actually I'm going to write the plus 3 and the plus 10. And then I'm going to bring down that variable. Both of them have to have that variable. Then we group them into binomials. So now you have a binomial and another binomial. We just put parentheses around two binomials. And then we treat each binomial separately and factor out the greatest common factor. So the 2x squared and the 3x, I'm going to look for greatest common factors there. I know that both of them have an x that I can pull out. And then I'm going to divide each of those monomials by x so that I get my 2x plus 3. And I'm going to do the same with 10x plus 15. And I pulled out the 5. That's a positive 5. So what you notice now is that you end up with something that looks the same. We have the 2x plus 3 that is the same in both groups. So instead of writing it twice, I'm just going to write it one time. And then I'm going to combine my outside greatest common factors, x plus 5. And that is my final answer. Don't worry, as long as you have these steps written down and follow them step by step, you'll get it. Let's go ahead and get some more practice with this. Here we go, another problem. 3x squared minus x minus 4. I love this because it has negatives, so it's going to be a little bit harder. Step 1, factor the GCF. We don't have any, so I'm going to go ahead and label A, B, and C. Step 2, get the product of AC. I did it. It's negative 12. Now I'm going to look for factors so that I can use in my product sum method. Found it. It's going to be a negative 4 and a positive 3. Now I'm going to rewrite it in expanded form. Group it together. And then factor each greatest common factor from the binomial. Notice how my sign changes. This is the number one place kids make mistakes when dealing with negatives. My final answer here is x plus 1 and 3x minus 4. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to jump in and you're going to follow the steps and you're going to try to do this on your own. In the next video, I'm going to post the answers, but you have to try to do these on your own. Remember to label your A, B, and C, and remember to watch your negatives. See you in the next video.